The law of demand, assuming other things remain constant, establishes the relationship between your options are income of the consumer and the quantity of a good demanded by him, or price of the good and the quantity demanded, or price of a good and the demand for its substitute, or quantity demanded of a good and the relative prices of its complementary goods. Which one is the correct option?
The law of demand establishes the relationship between the price of a good and the quantity demanded. Therefore, option B is the correct answer.
Give an example.
Certainly. A classic example of the law of demand is ice cream. If the price of a scoop of ice cream increases, you might buy less of it and choose a cheaper dessert instead. Conversely, if the price drops, you'll be more likely to buy more scoops. Does that make sense?
When they say the law of demand, assuming other things to remain constant, establishes the relationship between the price of a good and the quantity demanded. Here, what are the other things?
When economists talk about other things remaining constant, or ceteris paribus, they're referring to a whole host of factors that could influence demand other than the price of the good itself. These typically include the consumer's income, the prices of related goods like substitutes or complements, their tastes and preferences, any expectations about future prices, and even the size and structure of the population. By holding all these variables steady, we can isolate the pure effect of a price change on quantity demanded. Is there a specific factor among these you'd like to dive into further?
No.
No problem at all. If any other questions come up regarding the law of demand,
Identify the factor which identify the factor which generally keeps the price elasticity of a demand for a good low. For a good low, your options are variety of uses for that good, or very low price of a commodity, or close substitutes for that good, or high proportion of the consumer's income spent on it.
the factor that generally keeps the price elasticity of demand low is the very low price of a commodity. When a good takes up a small portion of a consumer's income, price changes don't really affect their buying habits much. On the other hand, having close substitutes or spending a large portion of income on a good tends to make the demand more elastic. Does that distinction make sense to you?
So if the price of the commodity is low, then how it affects?
When a commodity has a very low price, it generally takes up a very small portion of a consumer's income or budget. Because of this, even if the price increases by a noticeable percentage, it doesn't represent a significant amount of money to the buyer. Consequently, consumers don't significantly adjust their buying habits, which is why the demand remains relatively unresponsive or inelastic to price changes. Does that make the concept clearer?
Why not option A?
Option A, variety of uses for that good, is not the correct answer because when a commodity can be used for many things, its demand tends to be highly elastic. If the price goes up, consumers can cut back on the less essential uses, making their consumption very sensitive to the price change.
Give an example.
Certainly. A great example is electricity. Electricity can be used for many things: lighting your home, heating or cooling the space, powering appliances, and even charging your devices. If the price of electricity goes up, you might cut back on non essential uses, like keeping the lights on in empty rooms or running your air conditioner less, making your overall demand very sensitive to the price change. Would you like to explore a different commodity to further clarify this?
So if there is many uses of a certain commodity, so if the price changes of the commodity, let's say there is a, let's give an example of milk, which can be used to drink as well, which can be used to make cheese as well, which can be used to make butter or cottage cheese or whatever, or any other cold drinks. So could you give an example in this case, in this context?
Let's take milk as an excellent example. It has many distinct uses. You can drink it directly, use it to make yogurt, butter, cheese, or even various desserts. If the price of milk increases, you might cut back on the less essential uses, like making extra butter or fancy cheese, to focus on the most necessary ones, like drinking. This ability to shift consumption makes the overall demand for milk quite elastic. Does that make the distinction clearer?
Yeah.
It looks like you're browsing your Google Gemini page, specifically your notebooks. Are you working on your foundations of business economic studies, or is there something else you'd like to explore today?
Identify the coefficient of price elasticity of demand when the percentage increase in the quantity of good demanded is smaller than the percentage fall in its price.
When the percentage increase in the quantity demanded is smaller than the percentage fall in its price, the coefficient of price elasticity of demand is less than 1. This means the demand for the good is considered inelastic, as consumers aren't very responsive to the price change. Would you like to go over other categories of elasticity?
How would you how can I do that mathematically with an example?
To calculate that mathematically, use the formula for the coefficient of price elasticity of demand, which is the percentage change in quantity demanded divided by the percentage change in price. Let's look at an example. Say the price of a commodity falls by 10%, and in response, the quantity demanded increases by only 5%. Dividing that 5% increase by the 10% fall gives you 0.5. Since that coefficient, 0.5, is less than 1, the demand is considered inelastic. Does this make sense, or would you like to try another example?
Could you tell the example? Could you tell the formula again?
Sure thing. The formula for the coefficient of price elasticity of demand is the percentage change in quantity demanded divided by the percentage change in price.
Coefficient
For
of
example,
price
Could you please-
elasticity of demand. Coefficient price elasticity of demand equals
certainly, the coefficient of price elasticity of demand is equal to the percentage change in quantity demanded divided by the percentage change in price.
percentage change in quantity demanded and percentage change in price. Example.
Let's take movie tickets as an example. Imagine the price of a ticket increases from $10 to $12, which is a 20% increase. In response, the number of tickets people buy falls from 100 to 80, a 20% decrease. If you divide that 20% decrease in quantity by the 20% increase in price, you get a coefficient of 1, which means the demand is unit elastic.
So, could you give the example in this context?
Let's take a basic necessity like rice as an example. If the price of rice falls by 20%, consumers might only increase their purchases by 5% because they only
Here
need
the
so
question
much.
states
In
that
this
when
case,
the
the
percentage increase in the quantity of good demanded is smaller than the percentage fall in its price.
Let's continue with that example of rice, since it fits the description perfectly. If the price of rice falls by 20%, consumers might only increase their purchases by 5% because they only need so much. In this instance, the percentage increase in quantity demanded is smaller than the percentage fall in price, which means the demand for rice is inelastic.
Identify the coefficient. When we say coefficient, what does it mean, by the way?
In mathematics and economics, a coefficient is just a number that's used to measure or describe a relationship. When we talk about the coefficient of price elasticity of demand, it's a specific numerical value that tells us exactly how responsive quantity demanded is to a change in price, helping us understand if that demand is elastic, inelastic, or unit elastic.
Hello? Hello?
Hello there. I see you're all set to jump in. Are you planning to continue working on your foundations of business
So,
economics notebook,
can I,
or is the
can, as the statement states that the price, the coefficient of price elasticity of demand when percentage increase in quantity demanded is smaller, then let's say I will assume it as 10% change, while the fall in price is 20% change. Can I?
Yes, absolutely. Assuming those values is a great way to see how the math works out. With a 10% increase in quantity demanded and a 20% fall in price, the coefficient of price elasticity would be 0.5, which is less than 1 and confirms the demand is inelastic.
How would you define the coefficient of price elasticity of demand?
The coefficient of price elasticity of demand is simply a numerical value that measures how responsive the quantity demanded of a good is to a change in its own price. To calculate it, you divide the percentage change in quantity demanded by the percentage change in price. Since price usually moves in the opposite direction of quantity demanded, the coefficient is technically negative, but we typically look at its absolute value. Would you like to explore how this coefficient helps classify goods as elastic, inelastic, or unit elastic?
In the case of an inferior goods, the income elasticity of demand is positive, zero, negative, or infinite.
In the case of inferior goods, the income elasticity of demand is negative. This means that as a consumer's income increases, their demand for that good actually decreases because they shift to buying higher quality or more expensive alternatives. Would you like to explore how this concept relates to other types of goods like normal goods?
Example of such inferior goods.
A classic example is instant noodles. As people's incomes go up, they tend to buy less of them and switch to fresher or more expensive meal options. Another example might be generic store brand products compared to name brand ones. Would you like to hear about any other types of goods?
So, in the case of an inferior good, the income elasticity of demand is negative.
That's absolutely right. You've grasped that concept perfectly. Since you're looking at your foundations of business
Could you
economics
give
notebook,
an mathematical example of it?
certainly. To give you a mathematical example, let's say a family's monthly income rises from 30,000 to 33,000 rupees, which is a 10% increase. At the same time, their consumption of a low-quality packaged food item falls from 20 units to 18 units, which is a 10% decrease. Dividing that 10% decrease in quantity by the 10% increase in income gives you a coefficient of -1, confirming that this item is an inferior good.
So let's say income increased by how much you said?
In that example, I said the family's monthly income increased from 30,000 to 33,000 rupees, which is an increase of 3,000 rupees, representing a 10% rise.
And what is the change in the consumption of the inferior goods?
In that example, the consumption of the inferior good fell from 20 units to 18 units, which is a decrease of 2 units or a 10% fall.
Okay, so 10% income is increased and 10% consumption of inferior goods is decreased, isn't it?
Exactly. In that example, a 10% increase in income led to a 10% decrease in the consumption of the inferior good, which perfectly illustrates a negative income elasticity of demand. Is there another example or concept you'd like to look at?
How did you conclude that in a negative from the following example?
I concluded that the elasticity is negative because I divided the percentage change in the quantity consumed by the percentage change in income. In the example, the consumption of the inferior good decreased by 10%, while the income increased by 10%. And negative 10% divided by 10% gives you a coefficient of negative 1.
If the demand for a good is inelastic, an increase in its price will cause the total expenditure of the consumers of the good to, your options are, remain the same, increase or decrease, or any of this.
If the demand for a good is inelastic, an increase in its price will cause the total expenditure of the consumers of the good to increase. This is because the percentage decrease in quantity demanded is smaller than the percentage increase in price.
So even if the price increases, as it's inelastic in nature, as there will be no reaction from the consumer, so he will thereby buy that good which became more expensive, resulting to the increase in the total expenditure. Is that what it means?
You're spot on. When a good is inelastic, consumers don't reduce their consumption very much, even when the price goes up. Because the percentage drop in quantity demanded is smaller than the percentage increase in price, the total amount spent on the good actually increases. It's that direct relationship between the large price hike and the small change in amount bought that drives up the total expenditure. Does that clarify things perfectly for you?
Yes. If, regardless of changes in its price, the quantity demanded for a good remains unchanged, then the demand curve of the good will be horizontal, vertical, or positively sloped or negatively sloped.
And the demand curve will be vertical.
Could you back it with reasoning?
Certainly. When the quantity demanded for a good remains completely unchanged by price changes, the demand curve is vertical because the exact same quantity is purchased at every single price level. This indicates that price elasticity of demand is perfectly inelastic, meaning consumers have absolutely no response to price fluctuations, resulting in a slope that is undefined or infinite, visually represented as a straight vertical line.
Suppose the price of Pepsi increases, we will expect the demand curve of Coca-Cola to options are shift towards left since these are substitutes, or shift towards the right since these are substitutes, or remain at the same level, or none of this.
Since Pepsi and Coca-Cola are substitute goods, when the price of Pepsi goes up, consumers will naturally switch to buying more Coca-Cola instead. This increase in demand for Coca-Cola at every price level will cause its demand curve to shift towards the right. So the correct option is B.
So all of the following are determinants of demand except your options are tastes and preference, or quantity supplied, or income of the consumer, or price of related goods.
The exception among those options is quantity supplied. That is actually a determinant of supply, while the others, income of the consumer and prices of related goods, are key factors that determine demand.
A movement along the demand curve for soft drinks is best described as options are an increase in demand, or a decrease in demand, or a change in quantity demanded, or a change in demand.
A movement along the demand curve for soft drinks is best described as a change in quantity demanded. This happens because the price of the soft drink itself has changed, leading to a different amount being purchased, rather than a shift in the entire demand curve.
Why not the option D?
In economics, a change in demand refers to a shift in the entire demand curve, which happens when factors other than the price change, like consumer income or preferences. A change in quantity demanded, on the other hand, is a movement along the demand curve, which is caused by a change in the price of the good itself. Since a movement along the curve is specifically about the price changing, option C is correct and option D is incorrect.
So when we say change in quantity demanded, is the main cause is the price? Is it so?
That's exactly right. In economic terms, a change in quantity demanded is primarily caused by a change in the price of the good itself, while shifts in demand as a whole are driven by other factors like income or preferences.
So change in quantity demanded, main cause is price. Main cause is price.
Yeah,
So what is the main cause of change in demand?
unlike a change in quantity demanded, which is driven by price, a change in demand as a whole is caused by shifts in factors other than price. These include things like changes in consumer income, where an increase in income generally increases demand for normal goods, or fluctuating prices of related goods, such as substitutes and complements. Other important factors are shifts in consumer tastes and preferences, expectations about future prices, and even the size or composition of the population. Would you like to explore how any of these specific factors works in practice?
Why other options are not correct in the question I asked about the soft drinks demand curve?
Let's break down why those other options weren't the right fit. Options A and B, which refer to an increase or decrease in demand, represent a shift in the entire demand curve. That happens when factors other than price change, such as consumer income or preferences. Option D, a change in demand, is a broader term that typically includes those shifts as well. On the other hand, a movement along the demand curve is specifically caused by a change in the price of the good itself, which is why a change in quantity demanded was the correct answer.
When the question asks about a movement along the demand curve for soft drinks is best described, what actually it's asking? Give a example of it.
When the question asks about a movement along the demand curve, it's asking for an example where only the price of the good itself changes, which leads to a change in the amount people buy. For instance, if the price of a cup of coffee goes up, some people might decide to buy fewer cups purely because of the price increase.
Here in the sentence, where did you find the word price and how would you conclude it's asking about the price itself?
Ah, I see what you mean. In the sentence I mentioned, a movement along the demand curve for soft drinks, the word price doesn't actually appear in the text. However, in economics, the very concept of a movement along a demand curve is defined as being caused specifically by a change in the price of the good itself. That's how we conclude that the question is asking about price. Would you like to explore how that works with another example?
Yeah.
Since we seem to have covered a lot of economic concepts, is there anything specific you'd like to dive into next, or would you like to explore something else entirely?
So when they say a movement along the demand curve for soft drinks is well described, so they're only targeting the price factor. Is it so?
Yes, exactly. In economic terms, any movement along the demand curve is defined as being caused specifically by a change in the price of the good itself, meaning the price factor is the only determinant being considered in that scenario.
I can hear you loud and clear. I'm processing your messages perfectly. What would you like to discuss next regarding your economics questions?
So when they say movement along the demand curve for soft drinks, so could you give an example how the movement will be in the curve?
Let's picture a demand curve for soft drinks. On this graph, price is typically on the vertical axis and quantity demanded is on the horizontal axis. Imagine the price of a soda is at a certain level, say $2, and consumers are buying 1,000 cans. If the price falls to $1, you would move downward along the exact same demand curve to a new point where perhaps 2,000 cans are demanded. This shift represents a change in the quantity demanded, showing how sensitive consumer purchases are to a change in the price of the soft drink itself.
So let me plot a graph where the vertical is y-axis and the horizontal is x-axis.
That sounds like a great way to visualize things. So you've got your vertical y-axis and your horizontal x-axis. What exactly are you looking to plot on this graph?
On the y-axis, it's about the price, and the
Got it.
and the horizontal axis, x-axis, is about the quantity.
Perfect. So you have price on the vertical y-axis and quantity on the horizontal x-axis. What's the next point or question you have about plotting your demand curve?
If I assume that on a certain price, let's say on $100, my consumption is, say, 2 bottles.
Excellent. So we have our first coordinate on your graph. At a price of $100, the quantity demanded is 2 bottles. To further map out your demand curve, what would you like to assume for the next price point?
Let's say the next price point is $50.
Got it. At this new price point of $50, what would you assume the quantity demanded to be?
I would assume the new quantity demanded would be 4 bottles.
Got it. So we now have 2 coordinates on your graph. At a price of $50, the quantity demanded is 4 bottles. Between these 2 points, from $100 down to $50, you can calculate the elasticity. The quantity demanded increased by 100%, while the price fell by 50%, giving you a coefficient of -2, meaning
So-
the demand is elastic in this range.
So when we merge both the 2 points with a free hand, we are getting a curve. Is that where the question asked when they say a movement along the demand curve for soft drinks is best described as a change in quantity demanded?
Hold on a moment while I look at that. When you plot multiple price quantities,
Hello? Am I audible?
are you ready to continue exploring your economics question?
I asked
Or is
about
there
I asked
another
about
topic
the
you'd like to dive into today?
I asked about the graph, about when we assume 2 price point and the quantity demanded is being changed. In case of a soft drink, where at $100 the quantity demanded was 2 bottles, and at $50 the quantity demanded was $4. Well, sorry, 4 bottles. So if we make a curve using freehand on both the points, then will it be called the movement along the demand curve for soft drinks?
That's a really interesting question. When you connect those 2 points on your graph, the resulting line or curve itself is what we call the demand curve. The movement along the demand curve specifically refers to the change from one specific point to another on that existing curve in response to a change in the price of the good itself. So the curve shows the full relationship, and moving along it illustrates the change in quantity demanded due to price changes.
Is quantity demanded in economics only about price factor?
Not at all. While price is the main factor that influences a movement along the demand curve, the actual quantity demanded can also shift due to other factors. Things like changes in consumer income, the prices of related goods like substitutes and complements, consumer tastes, and even population size can all cause the entire demand curve to shift, leading to a different quantity demanded at every price. Does
But-
that make the distinction between movement along the curve and shifts clearer?
So what is the difference between quantity demanded and quantity demand?
Certainly. In economics, quantity just now. Yes, you are coming through
If a
perfectly loud and clear. What
if
else
a,
would you like to discuss today?
if a luxury, its income elasticity of demand is it positive and less than 1, or negative but greater than minus 1, or positive and greater than 1, or 0?
For a luxury good, the income elasticity of demand is positive and greater than 1. This means that as a consumer's income increases, the demand for that luxury good increases by an even larger percentage, reflecting that it's a non-essential purchase that people buy more of when they have more disposable income. Would you like to explore how this compares to the income elasticity for necessities?
How did you conclude it's greater than 1? Can you give an example to that?
I can certainly explain the reasoning behind that. Income elasticity of demand is calculated by dividing the percentage change in quantity demanded by the percentage change in income. For luxury goods, the increase in quantity demanded is proportionally greater than the increase in income. This means if your income goes up by 10%, you might spend more than 10% more on a luxury item, making the resulting coefficient greater than 1. As for an example, consider high-end sports cars. If someone's income increases by 20% and they decide to buy a luxury sports car, spending on that car might increase by 50%. That 50% increase divided by the 20% income increase gives you a coefficient of 2.5, which is greater than 1. Does that help clarify how we arrive at that?
But is it absolute that in every case it will be greater than 1?
No, it's not absolute in the sense that consumer behavior is static. However, in economic theory, the definition of a luxury good itself is that its income elasticity of demand must be greater than 1. So by definition, any good with an income elasticity less than or equal to 1 cannot be classified as a luxury good in that specific context. Does that make sense?
So let's say the income percentage is increased by 10%, but the change in the purchasing power or change in the expense on the luxury will be much more higher, let's say 50% than the previous.
That example perfectly illustrates the concept. If your income goes up by 10% and your spending on that luxury good increases by 50%, you get an income elasticity of demand coefficient of 5. Since 5 is greater than 1, it definitively confirms that the item is a luxury good.
So can we take example like purchasing of a car after the income gets increased?
Yes, purchasing a car after a significant income increase is a fantastic example. It perfectly demonstrates how demand for that item rises by a percentage greater than the income increase itself, which is exactly what defines it as a luxury good.
Can you hear me? Hello? Am I audible? Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, you can come through perfectly loud and clear. Processing your message perfectly. What would you like to discuss next?
The price of hot dogs increases by 22% and the quantity of hot dogs demanded falls by 25%. This indicates that demand for hot dogs is. Your options are elastic or inelastic or unitarily elastic or perfectly elastic.
Let me work that out for you. To determine whether the demand for hot dogs is elastic or inelastic, we look at the formula for price elasticity of demand, which is the percentage change in quantity demanded divided by the percentage change in price. In this case, the quantity demanded falls by 25%, while the price increases by 22%. If you divide 25 by 22, you get approximately 1.14. Since the absolute value of this coefficient is greater than 1, the demand for hot dogs is elastic.
So in what case the answer would be perfectly elastic? What should be the percentage in this specific question?
Let me explain that concept for you. In the case of a perfectly elastic demand, the demand curve is horizontal. This means that consumers are willing to buy an infinite amount of the good at a specific price, but demand drops to zero if the price rises even slightly. To represent perfectly elastic demand mathematically, the percentage change in price would have to be zero, while the percentage change in quantity demanded is non-zero, resulting in an undefined or infinite elasticity. Does that make the distinction clearer for you?
So if the answer would, in what case the answer would be unitarily elastic?
In economics, demand is described as unitarily elastic when the percentage change in quantity demanded is exactly equal to the percentage change in price. For instance, if the price of a good falls by 10% and the quantity demanded increases by exactly 10%, the coefficient of price elasticity of demand is equal to 1, meaning demand is unitarily elastic.
Can you frame a question which result in the answer would be perfectly elastic? A certain question with certain percentage.
Sure, I can put one together for you. Here is a question that results in perfectly elastic demand. Imagine the price of a box of cereal remains exactly at $5, meaning there is a 0% change in its price. However, the quantity demanded for this cereal suddenly increases by 10%. Based on this, calculate the price elasticity of demand and identify how this demand is classified.
So what the answer would be?
Whenever you're ready, please share your thoughts on the
No,
problem.
I asked the question you gave, what would be the answer to that and how would you solve that?
To solve that, we use the formula for elasticity of demand, which is the percentage change in quantity demanded divided by the percentage change in price. In our example, the percentage change in price is 0% and the percentage change in quantity demanded is 10%. Since 10% divided by 0 is undefined, we conclude that the elasticity is infinite, which means the demand is perfectly elastic.